Okay, well, it looks like they've kind of stabled out. And so Amy and Allison, Judy, are you ready to get started? Great, great. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today to develop a strategy around how to operationalize our collaboration's vision to embed shared print into the collection lifecycle. The goal of our webinar today is to provide you with an introduction to the lifecycle document, to report back on focus group discussions we recently conducted with practitioners around our document, and to invite another layer of review and feedback before finalizing the document as a living outline of what we're trying to achieve. And finalizing is in quotes, and you'll understand why as the day progresses. So before we get started, I did want to say, in case you don't know all of us, I'm going to ask each of our presenters to introduce themselves when they take over presenting, if that's okay. I realize we forgot to cover that. So let me quickly introduce myself. I am Heather Welton. I'm the Shared Print Program Officer at HathiTrust, and my pronouns are she and her. So a little bit of housekeeping. Everyone has been muted upon joining. Please continue to do this until the open discussion times, when there'll actually be several times where we would ask you to unmute and actually have a conversation with us. You can also choose to use chat, raise your hand, or just simply unmute. We'll also have a public document for those of you who would rather ask questions or add notes that way that we'll share with you. Actually, it's on the bottom of the screen right now, and Allison will post it in chat. So we encourage at any time, though, for you to use chat or the document to share reactions, thoughts, or ideas you have. As you'll hear, this document really is a growing thing, and so we really value any feedback or discussions you want to have on it. As we mentioned in our messages, we will be recording these webinars in order to share them with the larger library community. And we will plan to post them to our website, also along with a summary of the discussion today. So on the screen and in chat, you'll see a link to the public comment document. And this has links to the document we will reference throughout the discussions today. And it has the open discussion questions we'll be asking if you need to refer to those later. And again, a space to add any comments or questions you may have during this presentation, or at any time if you even want us to follow up after. So let's kick it off. In early 2020, the California Digital Library, the Center for Research Libraries, and HathiTrust announced that our organizations would work together to build on a decade of collaboration, innovation, and expertise to define a new phase of shared print, one that's built on open and interconnected infrastructure. This collaborative effort is emerging from the rich background of local and regional shared print programs expansion, interconnection, and technical innovation. Our three groups really saw an opportunity to step into a facilitative leadership role, to gather the threads of the broader community's efforts, and to advance shared print's transition to a new phase of integration and interoperability. Ultimately, our vision for our collaboration is that the future of shared print collections is shared. Embedding shared print within the life cycle of library collections promotes equity of access, it enriches the scholarly record, and increases opportunities for research and teaching. A well-developed collaborative and interoperable infrastructure, that's a tongue twister, ensures that we will realize the full potential of our networks and their collective collections. Our collaboration is committed to shared print's integration into the scholarly ecosystem. We see this collaboration as an opportunity to shift the shared print paradigm so that the work is not tangential to the traditional collection, but really fully integrated into the life cycle of collections. This means from acquisitions and selection to discovery and resource sharing and beyond. As part of this work, In January of this year, the collaboration launched the collection comparison tool to advance equity of collection decision-making. And we can post that shortly in the chat if you're not familiar with our tool, that you can check it out. But since we've launched the tool, we have been really busy focusing on embedding shared print into the collection lifecycle, which actually brings us to why we're all here today with you. So this past year, we've really focused on working on developing a narrative that brings together ways to envision, that brings together a way to embed shared print into the collection lifecycle. This is sort of a vision to do this. This culminated in a document currently titled Shared Print in the Collections Lifecycle. This document envisions how to embed shared print into the collection lifecycle in the areas of selection and acquisition, processing and cataloging, shelving, discovery, resource sharing, assessment, and collection management. While many of these are unique units within libraries, this document groups them into processes involved in each area rather than in departments. Since we've shared the document with the group, and our discussion will delve into these areas in some detail, I'm not going to spend the time going in depth on either on sort of the bullets within these or things in the document right now, but I will highly encourage you to have it open as the presentation continues. And again, we'll be sharing the URL throughout the meeting in case you lose it or you've joined late. But right now, I want to turn it over to my collaborator, Allison, to introduce herself and discuss the focus groups we've held thus far and some high-level findings from those. So Allison, take it away.
Thank you, Heather, and hello, everyone. I am Allison Wohlers, the Shared Print Program Manager at the California Digital Library, and my pronouns are she and hers. Thank you, Heather, for advancing the slide. So in addition to that shared print in the life cycle of collections document that we shared ahead of this webinar back on Monday, we also shared a document that summarizes the background and themes of the practitioner focus groups that we coordinated in April. And if you didn't end up seeing that document ahead of this webinar, no problem. One of my colleagues will drop the link into the chat. And I'm going to flesh it out a little bit more in the next few slides. So as part of mapping the collections lifecycle and how various communities envision shared print fitting in, we wanted to incorporate practitioner feedback from major areas of the collections lifecycle in order to refine our vision and also surface areas for discussion with the larger community. So to do this, we designed focus groups that targeted particular areas of the life cycle, essentially those areas that Heather had outlined on the previous slide: acquisition, selection, cataloging, discovery, etc. This gave us the opportunity to hear in depth from practitioners specializing in those areas. Participants were identified through a variety of networks, including the Rosemont Shared Print Alliance and the Partnership for Shared Book Collections. And participants really included a range of individuals, some with very extensive experience in shared print workflows and practices, and some who were coming to the conversation with less exposure to shared print, who really provided, fresh eyes to the topic and sussing out what we really meant when we were talking about shared print and collective collections. So it was great to have that range of experience in the participant focus groups. So we asked participant focus groups a number of questions. Some questions were specialized to the particular domains they were associated with, so discovery, resource sharing, or whatever the main topic was for the session. But we also asked all focus groups 3 primary questions that reached across the domains. And those were around how shared print and collective collections are or could be effectively embedded into the work of their domain, what trends are affecting their domain, and the role of collective collections within them. And then finally, we asked all participants in the focus groups to give us some feedback on that lifecycle document and how it could be clarified or enhanced. So from those discussions, we synthesized two primary outputs that we want to report back on to the community. So the first bullet on this slide is in reference to the specific pieces of feedback related to clarity and completeness of the lifecycle document. So focus group participants had particular feedback on various pieces of the document. For example, we heard that the concept of equitable discovery really needs more specific definition to be effective. Participants also observed missing pieces in the lifecycle document. For example, where is reference services in this vision? And also, should preservation really have its own domain as we think about these things? So for these kinds of feedback, we've essentially created a laundry list for areas that we need to return to in the lifecycle document and give a little bit more thought to. And it's on my list to incorporate all of those pieces of feedback into the public commenting version of the lifecycle document so others can see them and we don't lose track of them. So that's one side of the outputs from the focus groups. The second bullet on this slide refers to broad cross-cutting themes that we synthesized, which came up in multiple focus groups and in a variety of ways. And it is really these that we are most excited to share broadly and use as the basis for more discussion around the vision for embedding shared print into the life cycle of collections. So those 5 primary themes are outlined in those sub-bullets, on the slide, but I'm just going to expand a little bit on each. So probably the number one theme that emerged from the focus group discussions, and this was no surprise and won't be a surprise probably to those here, was creating an effective data economy in our networked shared print ecosystem. So specifically, we heard about this in terms of the ability for individual libraries and groups of libraries to access data sets connected to shared collections and integrate them into various library services, be it discovery, resource sharing, collection management, any of these domains. So there is a fundamental need for the availability of large, comprehensive data sets. But also a complementary need for the ability to customize what libraries take out of those data sets and then how extracts of data are folded into local systems and services. We also heard that the data needs are quite varied. They encompass not only descriptive and administrative metadata, but also qualitative and quantitative metrics data that we gather. And related to that, we heard in several focus groups that as we continue to move into an era of gathering and managing data sets around our collective collections, we need to be thinking in new and innovative ways about how we track and assess collection value. Some examples of that might be, how do we track and assess the cost of not participating in shared print or engaging with collective collections as a part of library work? Or how can we be thinking about the use and circulation of print in more qualitative assessment terms? So those are just some of the examples of the ways that we might need to continue to expand how we think about what metrics we gather in relation to shared collections. Focus group discussions highlighted that there are still many flavors of shared print and collective collections being defined at small, local, and very large network scales, as well as collaborative networks that are not explicitly associated with shared print or collective collections, but that will be essential for this vision of embedding shared print into the life cycle of collections. So thinking about, resource sharing expert groups or cataloging collaborative networks. So for us to realize a vision of embedding shared print into the life cycle of collections, we need to work to connect or in some way unify and harmonize network and grassroots level efforts at different levels. We also heard about the challenges of sustaining the work that goes into developing and managing shared collections. And one way to think about this is shared print and collective collections are arguably still really occupying a space of special projects rather than being integrated into daily workflows, expectations, and policies. This probably means we're missing opportunities, and this is more effort for those on the ground doing the work. And so we took as a theme from these discussions that embedding shared print into the life cycle should facilitate a shift from thinking about the work as a special project to more as daily work, which is something the shared print community has discussed before, but we heard again here in these focus groups. Connected to that is the cross-cutting theme that we still lack the capacity for easy model building across key areas, whether it's cost models or economic models for how collective collections are functioning in the library networks. Certainly an emergent and really important area is diversity, equity, and inclusion models. And perhaps a more specific one is, we seem not yet to have the ability to come together around discovery models for shared print. We're getting there, but we probably still need help there. So there's a lot of work to do, and likely our facility to build models has a lot to do with how we build that data economy from the first theme I noted, and also how we harmonize the work at various levels of effort, as in that second theme I noted. And then finally, it was clear from focus group discussions that the domains as defined are highly interconnected. And this really takes us back to our mission and vision for this collaboration when it came together. And that is that this work is so interconnected and needs to be interoperable. So what we take from that is that enhancements to infrastructure, whether it is social infrastructure, the people doing the work and how they're supported in doing that work, or the technical infrastructure, will only be effective if that interconnection piece is part of the design. So those were the 5 major themes we synthesized from the very rich and far-reaching feedback of the practitioners in the focus groups. And I just have to say that we emerged from those focus groups feeling so inspired and motivated, and it took so many iterations to really digest the rich content that we got out of those discussions. So I'll just close this reporting on the focus groups and what we learned from them by sending very sincere and grateful thanks to all those who gave us their time and participated in the focus groups. And so we have, as Heather alluded to, some specific discussion questions that Amy is going to introduce shortly, but we wanted to pause here in the presentation and invite questions or comments on the focus group themes. So what resonates with you, maybe what doesn't, what would benefit from more clarification. And I think, Heather, we could probably at this point stop screen sharing so folks can see one another. So again, there are lots of options for how you could share your questions or comments. There is the Google Doc. You can put something in chat, or feel free to unmute and share verbally. So far, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat or coming up in the document. Just going to give it another minute. We'll maybe thinking and digesting. Okay, well, so seeing no questions or comments at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Amy Wood. And of course, in this next section, we can certainly connect back to the focus group themes and sort of bring the two conversations together. So Amy, take it away whenever you are ready.
Great, thanks, Allison. So I'm Amy Wood. I'm the head of metadata and discovery enhancement at the Center for Research Libraries. And we have prepared 5 questions. And the questions came from those themes that Allison mentioned. So if you're still sort of mulling them over, you know, it would be great to incorporate your thoughts into the questions. So the first question is, how do we move the collective collection from an idea to action? So we found in the focus groups that not everyone defined the collective collection in the same way, and that people were familiar with the idea of collective action, but not always familiar with collective collection. So if it's not quite yet a shared idea, how do we even move that idea to action? And while Allison outlined the 3, you can put your answers in chat. You can put them on the document. I am a huge fan of unmuting and joining the conversation. So I would love to have someone speak up. So Heather's just putting the question in chat, but I can repeat it here. So how do we move the collective collection from idea to action? So we do have one comment that shared print commitments must be included in all of the collection weeding plans. So I'm wondering, Beth, if I can ask just a follow-up. You know, so is that one way of sort of bringing that collective collection from idea to task, or are you commenting on some of those themes of special project and everyday project? How are you bringing that into the conversation? So, so another idea, I think, is from bringing that collective collection from idea to action, I think, is to have the ability to universally discover commitments. Matthew, are you responding to the question, or just sort of commenting on that theme related to data or discovery models?
I was doing it for the question, Amy.
Oh, great.
For the how do we move? Yeah, that was just which I know is kind of a big one and not an easy one to solve.
So so the idea you're sharing is that if we can universally discover the commitments, that will sort of help us formulate or trust the sort of idea of the collective collection and not think so locally. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we can, because at the moment a lot of the commitment information is kind of siloed in different systems, and being able to see all that commitment information in one place might help us and our patrons think more about the collective collection as one group of titles that's kind of owned by the community and available to be accessible to that community as well.
And we're thinking, and I know we have a raised hand, but I just want one more follow-up question with Matthew. And when you're saying when we see, is the we sort of the universal, the scholars as well as the librarians, or mostly the practitioners?
Yeah, if all the different kind of stakeholder groups, librarians and scholars, so we can all see it in one discoverable place.
Great. Thank you. And Adolfo, I see that you have your hand raised. Are you able to? Okay.
Yeah, so thank you. And I guess it just really is just a variation of the individual who just spoke is we need to sort of understand what is the collective collection. And so, yeah, so discoverability, so having some sort of mechanism where we say, oh, this is the collection, will allow us to not only make it discoverable and usable by everybody, but also allows us to then start setting policies, processes in place for the use of that collection, the management of that collection, allows us to do some sort of long-term planning for the growth, preservation of the collection. I know from certain aspects, there's an economic question that to me remains unresolved. It's all fine and dandy for many of us to say, oh yeah, we're gonna create this mega collection and everybody and their uncle can have access to it. But there's an underlying cost that those institutions bear in building that collection, maintaining that collection, building and creating the infrastructure around that collection. And I guess from one perspective, I feel, I'm gonna be kind of blunt about it, a little selfish of those people who are not supporting that and just taking and making use of that. Because as librarians and librarians, we're gonna say, yeah, this is gonna be open to everybody and their uncle, right? We're not gonna impose membership fees or whatever to be able to use the collection. But we need to figure out financially how we build and expand that collection. I mean, I know many of our institutions, don't have a lot of money to build new buildings to house those ever-growing collections, right? And we need some sort of mechanism to be able to support that. And again, I'm not questioning the value of doing so. It's just, and so in that sense, being able to sort of say to the world, hey, this is your collection. This is how big it is. This is what you're going to get, allows us possibly then to market it both so they can be used and also so that we can figure out ways of maintaining it from a funding perspective.
Right, and so I like what you're saying too about that, even just defining as, okay, this is your collection, this is everything, you have access to everything. But you still have to, in order to kind of change hearts and minds and ideas, in order to have a shared idea, we really do have to address those questions of trust and cost and infrastructure and policies. Because those are the things that kind of underpin it. I think that's what. And we have someone that said, here, Adolfo. So you've got other people thinking the same way that you do as well. So I guess these questions are sort of meant to sort of build on each other. So so I think we'll move on to the next question, but feel free to tie in any thoughts again from the themes or from the first question. One of the first themes that Allison brought up was about the sort of data economy, and there's always a lot of conversation around library data and shared print data. So we really wanted to know more about your thoughts about creating a better data ecosystem, and that that goes a little bit beyond just sort of having access to a data pool, but what are we doing in terms of the production of that data, the distribution, the consumption, and the maintenance of that data, and how that maintenance not just sort of in keeping the lights on, but in making sure that that data continues to be relevant and migrate to be current in terms of current standards. So so we'd love to hear your thoughts about creating that better data ecosystem. And so just a little push. I've had plenty of hallway conversations, lots of people on this call about data and data that they'd love to have or data they can't have and all sorts of data issues. So I'd love it if you could share them with the group. Might have to call on someone. Well, at the risk of having him just leave me hanging, Doug, I'm going to call you out. I'm going to ask your opinion on the data because I think there are issues that come up even though we have some shared infrastructure in Canada. You have some things. You have a history of applying the rules and local practices. And in the US, we've had a slightly different path. And as we found, as you were pulling the data into paper, that sometimes those things bumped up against each other. And I know you're well versed with all of the cataloging data. So wondering if you'd like to share.
Okay, fair enough, Amy. I think you might have built me up a little bit much there, but okay. I think part of it is sort of the ongoing struggle to standardize and normalize and regularize a lot of the data as we begin to move it around more. When it lives in quite separate silos, you don't have the same issues as when you try to bring things together and share them in common systems. And so some of the work that I've done in COPL is not to move away from local catalog records, but to move also more towards using sort of OCLC type holdings and record information because it allows us to centralize some things and then go back to local catalogs. And I know we've had some issues around trying to balance quality of metadata and sort of available metadata for analysis. We also had that with the national program, looking at the federal government documents. I know in the US, everyone's government documents cataloging is the paragon of high quality, and that's fine. We had some issues. There's a lot of materials, and so people tried to do things quickly and efficiently. We had a similar situation in Canada, and when we tried to bring the information out, even from OCLC, to compare on kind of a common basis, we got some really interesting results. And I think we got some good results. Gwen is on this call. She had a lot to do on that committee as well. So a lot of it is really finding common, functional, usable data. And I like this integrated approach that you're talking about really through the life cycle, because I think it gets it out of the cataloging area, moves it really into the life of collections. And I think as we start to talk about that, we will reconsider our approaches to some data that we already have and new data that we're creating. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but is that a little bit some of the comments you were looking for, Amy?
That was very helpful. Thanks very much, Doug. Very much appreciated. And thanks for letting me this call.
No problem.
And there's also a comment from Rebecca about open infrastructure data that we can export and reuse. Tying back to Rodolfo's comment about collective has to be collectively supported financially. And I think that this is a really good point, particularly about the sort of export views. I mean, that data not to always have to go to someone to get that data out, to enable the practitioner, to make it easy to use this data, I think is a way that it will stay current, stay relevant, and continue to be maintained, and can be pointed to as a resource for making this a financially sustainable activity within libraries. There's also another comment in chat about from Jennifer Mark, moving towards more open data rather than proprietary data would help. And I think some of that is going to be finding ways to fund the creation of data and data systems that isn't reliant on selling access to said data. And that's a great point. And I think one thing I think it brings up, one issue maybe that we haven't always talked about in terms of shared print. When we talk about the data, we often talk about elements of the descriptive data, the bibliographic data, or even how many holdings libraries are there, or how many uses is this, how many times is this circulated. But I know CRL is now considering a migration of its ILS, and I'm sure everybody on here has experienced one or another during their careers. And it is very interesting that shared data that we are already sort of struggling to share, that bibliographic data, is pretty easy to move in and out of our different systems. But all of that proprietary data, even to migrate from one system at CRL to another, that proprietary, that ordering, circulation, all of that stuff that sort of links onto those bibliographic records, but which we may not yet have taken advantage of in terms of our shared print work. That's, that's when we start to get into that sort of proprietary aspect of those local systems. And of course, there are always the bigger systems, the WorldCat and other systems like that. So which even when the data can be shared, the access to the data, the user interface, those things are all proprietary. Oh, sorry. There's Adolfo, you've raised your hand again. Great. Feel free to unmute.
Yeah, hello again. I'm thinking about just other organizations, how they've taken the approach to sort of come up with standards, and specifically thinking of PCC in creating the BibCo standard record and the Concert standard record. Maybe a way to think about is getting ourselves together to create the shared print standard record so that all of us have a template for what data is minimally required or not minimally required. It's a standard record that we know is going to convey the information that is needed in order to manage and administrate and make use of a shared print collection. And so once we develop, assuming this is an idea that people like, once we develop that standard, then all shared print participants know, okay, every time we are committing to something in a shared print repository, we're also committing to making sure that our metadata meets this standard of description, or works toward doing that at some point. I know we have a lot of legacy data that probably would need to be fixed and reviewed and stuff like that. But it also, just kind of opens, it could also be levels of data for a shared print collection. So if you wanted to go down the path of saying, okay, we've actually looked at, not only have we described this item, but we know it's in this state of preservation condition. And we've done, assuming that you want to go down that path, a page-by-page review of the resource. So you know, not only is this in completely wonderful condition, it is intact 100%, right? And because that is a level of information that we need to know if we're going to be relying on these repositories as our copies, right? I mean, it's great if something is in Harvard's repository and we know it's available, but if it's missing 10 pages and I don't know that and I get rid of my copy, I'm not doing the group any favors, right? Anyway, so just an idea of maybe what we need to do is come up with a shared print standard record that sort of describes the data elements that are necessary. And then moving toward, again, and this ties back to the previous comments about discoverability, figuring out where we park this data. OCLC is the obvious choice because it's there, it's big, it's most of our data is in OCLC already. And OCLC clearly has an infrastructure to be able to deal with adding those levels of sort of descriptors, right? To say that, oh yeah, just like PCC, this is a PCC record, this is a shared print record, etc.
That's great, thank you. Well, I think I will move on to the next question. And that is, what do you see as the future of collective collections? Or in these areas or the domains that Allison and Heather were listing, the selection, acquisitions, cataloging, etc. What do you see as the future? And I'm wondering if, in particular, if you see this as sort of supplementing, enhancing, making library and scholarly work better, but sort of contained within our current system, or is this potentially something that will disrupt or change in a major way what we do now and how we define our work and our collection? So sounds like we're a little hesitant to think about or predict the future and the future of this work and how it intersects with ours. I will say that I once, well, before a presentation that I shared with Allison and Heather when we were preparing to present, I was trying to think of a hook in terms of of collective collection. And really what kept coming back to me was, if I could make this work, if I could ensure that that the important corpus of material was preserved and available for all scholars, would I, the only way to do that was by eliminating my own library, would I do that? Now, I'm not, of course, the person in charge of eliminating our library at CRL, but I thought it was a good way for me to think about not thinking locally. If eliminating my local one ensured the preservation, would I do that, and what would that mean? And we have a handout from Adolfo. Love to hear you. Adolfo, did you have your hand up to?
No, I did not. Sorry.
So just wondering if anyone else has some thoughts about how when we truly do realize this work of the collective collection, is that just a supplement? Is that radically changing what we're doing? And I think we have a comment in the chat. Well, a couple of them. One, for cataloging, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact. It will probably just become another element to think about or enter when creating or selecting a record. And I think that there, I agree with you to a certain extent, Jennifer, because I think, well, first of all, the cataloging community has a long history of collective action and working together, and that idea of that shared record in the first place. So I think you're right. That seems like more of sort of a supplement or addition. Michael Rodriguez offered also there's a growing focus on identifying and preserving scarce or last copies. I think you're right that just that activity, I think, brings us more into that idea of that collective collection. There may have been one comment that I missed. I see us, also for Michael, I see us thinking about more about digital access to physical collections, for example, through the creation and preservation of digital surrogates and through controlled digital lending of in-copyright materials. And you're right, I totally agree that, you know, access is one of those barriers that really keeps us from, you know, completely embracing that collective collection, you know, trusting that we can get that material when we need that material. There, and also from Matthew, Reddit, more reliance on commitments across programs, including in purchases. And that's another area that, or some ideas that came up in our focus group with the selectors and those in acquisitions. Again, that's a place where, in terms of acquisitions and selection, where we do have a history of collective action, but it's has more sort of a regional impact, I think, or a smaller group impact. And that was one of the things that came up in the focus groups, that that idea of collective collection was really strong on sort of a regional or smaller group of institutions, with a smaller group of institutions, particularly the more similar those institutions were. Because I think it takes away that the issue of trust a little bit, knowing that you're working with someone, a peer library, and being able to rely on those peers. But of course, if we're sort of branching out into the full collective collection, we do need to build that trust among non-like peers or partners. And Michael Goose, you are +1, Matthew, and the de facto national collection of collective development. So that's definitely collection development, selection, acquisitions are definitely places where they really start the life cycle of the collection. So I think we are all sort of looking to them for answers for building towards that. And if you have time, I will move on to the next question, and that is, I think I will skip the fourth question about what actions can we take in our local domains to strengthen the collective collection, because I feel like we sort of touched on those with number 3, but definitely if you have additional ideas about those, please add them to the chat. But the last question I'd like to ask is, you know, what is missing from our discussions about the collection life cycle in shared print? We are really, you know, as Allison said, in the focus groups, we learned so much, and we really, and just that we want to build on that insight and really pull in ideas from the community. So what is missing from our discussion? What should we be talking about in terms of the collection life cycle in shared print? that we've neglected to talk about to this. And Liz Miller said funding, and absolutely, those funding and engaging, I think, those who are in charge of funding and resources. And I wonder if you'd like to, either in chat or out loud, Liz, if you'd like to talk a little bit more about that, because there are certainly many levels in terms of that. You know, at the library level, selection level, at the regional and the consortia, or even the larger, like the OCLC's, the LC, Library of Congress, and all the Mellon has funded quite a bit. And Matthew has said that libraries not currently involved in shared print, public libraries, so bringing those in. And you're right, most of our conversation has focused on academic libraries and those workflows. And even though we know that there are public libraries involved in some programs, it really kind of started the conversation with there.
Hi, this is Liz. I'm going to answer your question as best I can. I'm a total newbie at shared print. So, if I say something really dumb, I hope you'll all be very patient with me. I was thinking, like, this is a really big endeavor. And this is at a time when, I remember when, I don't remember when, sorry, I'm not that old, but when MARC was developed, for example, so that libraries could more easily share records with each other. My background is as a cataloger. Libraries don't have that kind of those sort of resources these days, and the Library of Congress doesn't have those kind of resources. So I'm wondering, like, maybe could some of this be grant funded? I don't know if it already is, but like IMLS might be a great source for, like, some kind of a big grant to kind of just get a push to get this going, to just kind of fund the efforts that are already there, and then maybe kind of sprinkle some of that out to the participating libraries. Because I was thinking about, like, the staff time that it takes to describe these things and, and deal with the physical objects and ship them off and so on. So, I think, like, at all the levels, really, funding, and I do think that there's some selling that needs to happen. Someone else mentioned buy-in, and I think and I think that really has to happen, like, at all levels. Almost like a PR push or something to just kind of get folks on board, and then possibly, libraries could actually make formal commitments as they do for, specific shared print programs. So just, that's a bunch of rambling thoughts that I hope made a little bit of sense. Thank you.
That did make sense. Thank you, Liz. And you're right. The funding has to come at different levels. And there, and I appreciate your honesty, your forthrightness about that some of this is new to you. Maybe there has been funding and you're just not aware of it. Because I think that's really important. Because those of us who are sort of deeply embedded every day in the questions of shared print, when we hear that, when we hear those important comments, we realize we haven't gotten the word out. We not everybody knows. It's not completely embedded, and we have depended on some great seed funding from Mellon and IMLS and different projects, but that's not meant to be there forever. So how do we bridge going from that to sustainable funding when, as said, we still have many people that may not be fully aware, and it's really, I really appreciate your comments on this, and for sharing that, because you definitely are not alone. We found people as well in the focus groups who said, I don't know anything about the collective collection. So thank you. Well, I think there are some more comments. So the funding definitely got people going. But there are also Beth Owens said, speaking of working at the regional level, should we be focused also on statewide shared collection, or is that too much work? Beth, I think we just don't think about too much work. We know this is a big project and we can't get scared. We are, doesn't matter, but I think you're absolutely right. Statewide shared collections, you know, all of that feeds in to the larger collective collection. But the question is how do we respect what's going on at that regional level, the statewide level, or the consortial level, while still feeding into the, you know, the full collective collection. And see a comment from Helen Levinson, some mechanisms of easily transferring retention commitments as individual library situations change, such that retention commitments cannot be maintained. Well, and this is a really, really important question, one that I know the best practices in the Partnership for Shared Book has really been talking about. And some of that has to do, I think, with this shared repositories. You know, we might make a commitment at a local level, and then we've decided, or at the local library, and we've decided to move that commitment over to a shared facility. How do we, you know, how, given the way we tag our data, and do we communicate that to the world that has changed location, but it's still in the system? You know, how do we easily do that? As well as how do we maintain that provenance that it used to be at that other location, which is important. And one of the, and an issue that someone brought up in the focus groups about, it's sort of like giving credit to that initial library that said this is worth saving. So even if it's no longer at in my local collection, we had it and it was our idea. A little bit of credit is a good thing, because I think those things always trickle up to funding requests when we can. And I may have, oh, it sounded like Rebecca, did you have your hand up where you can offer a comment?
I did, and then I think somebody else kind of jumped in with something that I had been thinking of, but I'll throw in some extra comments while I've got the mic. I think that there's a lot of really interesting things in here, particularly with the different parts of the library and how shared print really extends its little shared print tentacles to all of the units of the library. And that's one of the things that I've told our deans when, you know, they say people want to know how to get involved with the Big Ten. I say they're already involved. They just don't realize that that's what it is. And on the future of the collective collection, I'm feeling skeptical today. It's been kind of a cynical kind of day in America. But I think that those national boundaries are really strong on some of these things. And I can see the collective collection going two different ways, one of which is that we are becoming more collaborative. And as we share these services, as well as the collections and the collection as service, I think that there's going to be a lot more of that, and that crossing over those boundaries is going to be really interesting. On the other hand, I see increasing corporatization and consolidation among corporations who are controlling access to these things. My background is in publishing. Whenever we talk about prospective print buying, I always come back with, that's a great way to pay $500,000 for a single volume of a book for your consortium, because in order to keep publishing viable, they have to sell a certain amount. And I was thinking this earlier today with some open data things that we were talking about, and in conjunction with the shutdown, the impending shutdown of Microsoft Academic, I'm skeptical that it's not going to come back as a vended product. And I see some of that happening with our collective collection areas where, what am I trying to say here? That the ways that we have already seen major players in this field buying up competitors, vending products back to the community, is not a trend that I see reversing, even as there's some backlash against it within the library community. So as we look out, not just like 2 or 3 years, but 20 years, I really have no idea where that goes, whether it becomes more open and shared or more corporatized and closed off. I'll stop talking now.
Yeah, I think that's those are great points, Rebecca, and your publishing background, I think, is really important. That is one aspect. That is another aspect that we don't often touch on. I think that sort of relationship to the publishers in terms of the shared print material and the work of shared print or the collective collection. I would, and also that idea of what sort of making plans for the next 2 or the next 5 years, but then what does it look like in 20, particularly on that infrastructure that we depend so much on. Those are really good point. Thank you. And adult, stand up. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi again. So actually building off of Rebecca's comment, because I've been thinking about this and trying to decide whether to say something or not. But looking at that, what is shared print going to be looking like in 20 years? So, and I guess where I'm coming back to is shared print a finite project? Or is it an ongoing forever project where we're continually going to be looking at other things that we're going to be trying to figure out how to put in a shared print repository and stuff like that. I mean, so and part of that where I'm going at is, and again, the sort of the long term, what are we doing 20 years from now is if those publications are available electronically, should they even be eligible for shared print, right? I mean, is the digital, or I mean, because the reality is many of our resources are probably going to be only electronic only, right? And what does that mean? Or maybe the shared print program becomes a digital shared print program at that point. But with regard to the physical collection, I mean, looking at, and maybe that sort of helps answer that, what is the future and what is sort of the scope of the shared print collection, right? Is it, and it also starts to ask, once you open sort of that door is, so you contribute something to shared print program, but all of a sudden we have 5 libraries that actually digitize the item. What is the value of that item then at that point? Because there's going to be a cost, an overhead cost, to maintaining that physical item, even if it isn't a shared print repository, right? And so what are sort of the competing costs of doing that and the value of actually having the print item? I think in many cases, for many of our items in our collections, we really only care about the content. The artifact itself is really irrelevant. It's not like it's signed by Abraham Lincoln, and there's value in that. It's probably just, run-of-the-mill publication that, publishers issued 500 copies and 500 libraries bought them. And, 100 years later, do we really need that physical item if it's been digitized and we have 10 copies of it? So, I think answering those questions or sort of asking ourselves with the short, what in 20 years, what do we want? I mean, is it, again, are we finite? Is it a finite program, or is it, thinking about an ongoing thing that, as long as there's print coming out, we're going to have a shared print repository?
Yeah. And I wanted to pick up on a couple of points that you said through. Thank you for your comments. And the first one was when you were saying, is shared print a finite program? And that was in the focus groups, just for the purpose of discussion, we talked about shared print and the collective collection, as interchangeable terms, so they meant the same thing. So I've been working in this area for, since about 2011. So just about 10 years. So I found myself lately saying, and 10 years ago, a lot lately, but so but 10 years ago, when we first started our print archives preservation registry, we talked about print preservation, and the holdings for this were going in. It was a print preservation program, and over time that became a little problematic. Ideas expanded about, were we just preserving this? What does preservation mean? Are we sharing this? And there was more of an emphasis on sharing that material. So it started to be talked about as shared print. And that also has that limitation that you brought up of, is this just a finite thing? Is this, will it be over when we've pulled, the programs have pulled together, or when that 25-year commitment ends? So now we've turned to this sort of collective collection concept, and which goes back to that, that question about how to operationalize that idea to make it a reality, make it part of the life cycle of collections. So, I think we're getting close to the end of so if you have any last thoughts, love to have you on mute and share them or put them in the chat. And maybe while we're waiting to see if anyone would like to provide a final comment, Heather, if we could share that last slide, and we can just talk about our next steps.
Sure, give me 1 second. I hope you can see it now.
Yes, we can. So thanks everyone very much for being a part of the conversation today. So our next steps are to finalize the life cycle document for public sharing and comment. So I think Allison mentioned we're going to have sort of two versions, one that is static for the moment, and one that's open, kind of like a whiteboard for you to add your comments and share. And we will go through those and add them to the sort of public or the static version as and they will really help us think about the points that are there. So please add to that document. We're also organizing a summit to bring together the vendors and library practitioners so we can realize some of the ideas and the opportunities that we have in the life cycle collections. We think a lot about and are very intentional about planning for improving the infrastructure that supports embedding shared print in the life cycle collections. Maybe many of you know that this last January, our collaboration supported the development of a collection comparison tool that is associated with the paper database. It's free and open to all. And that is absolutely something that I have pointed CRL members to, not for sort of strict shared print ideas, but they just want to know how their collection, their serials collection compares to what's in HathiTrust, something like that. And we will also continue to increase our community engagement. This has been really, really valuable for us to have these focus groups and to have this webinar today. So we absolutely are focused on community engagement and spreading the word in order to embed shared print in the life cycle of collections. So thank you very, very much. And there's just one more comment about having it be worthwhile to bring historians into the conversation about digitization versus keeping print copies and rare book librarians. And that was one comment from Adolfo that I didn't want to lose track of, but I guess I did. But that tension between that sort of circulating collection, special collections, is really another area that we need to continue to talk about. So thank you again. Thanks very much. Much appreciated.